Hello YouTubers, GamerX459 here. Today I kinda wanted to talk about the Nintendo versus pocketpair lawsuit. Alright? A lot has been going on with this lawsuit, and dare I say, it's definitely a mess, for both sides in this matter. As we all know, palworld and pocketpair are definitely on the upper hand of this whole lawsuit, so far as we know. But there's a lot of things to think about. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in here. That I can't help but feel like when this is all over, Palworld still won't be free of Lawsuit City. I feel like if the patent lawsuits fail, Nintendo will try one last ditch effort, and that is a lawsuit concerning the design. Like, so far they're going after the game mechanics, which I'm gonna just throw out my opinion concerning patents over game mechanics in general. I think there's something that shouldn't exist. Personally, I don't know why they exist, but I feel like it's something that should not be, in any way, shape, or form, a thing. Now, I've thought a lot about this. And I've been playing Palworld myself quite a bit. I played both Pokemon and Palworld for that matter. And I can definitely say that Palworld did what Nintendo don't. And, a lot of people have been calling it a slap suit and many other things. And you gotta admit, with the pattern that Nintendo has been demonstrating on how they're handling this lawsuit, it's really disgusting. Like, huge L. But the problem here isn't just the fact that it's a huge L for Nintendo. See, Pokemon is a co-owned type of thing by not just Nintendo, but also Game Freak and I think they're called Creatures Inc. or whatever. See, there's a secondary issue on that. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Nintendo, when it comes court case time, when it's time for the judge to bang the gavel and declare a verdict, there's a big issue. Because not only does this reflect poorly on Nintendo, it also reflects on Game Freak and Creatures Inc. Right now, they've said nothing. And part of me is also potentially concerned that that may be Nintendo's, like, ace in the hole, which is why Nintendo is staying so silent until the time comes. Perhaps that's some kind of ace in the hole we need to worry about. So, not just Nintendo, but also Game Freak and Creatures Inc. What happens if they get involved? Alright, they're going to have to get involved, in my personal opinion. It would look bad on them if they didn't. I think eventually we're going to have them, we're going to have to see what happens with them. Because they have a say in a lot of this. Because Game Freak is responsible for these mechanics that Nintendo is trying to sue over. They're the creators of it all. So, in my strong opinion, this could go one of two ways when it comes to Game Freak, specifically. They're going to have some kind of ace in the hole that could either bail Nintendo out, or they're just staying silent so as to not offend Nintendo, which, if that is the case, I feel like that's a bad move on their part. Because them doing nothing is hurting them as well. Because this lawsuit likely affects all three of them. And it's a huge money sink. The court fees and whatever else, that has to be affecting Game Freak and Creatures Inc. as a whole as well. So, In my strong opinion, the best thing Game Freak and Creatures Inc. could potentially do for their Pokemon franchise. I know Nintendo is a gaming giant, but I think they're also proving to be a cancer in that three-way ownership. So if you ask me, it might be honestly a good idea for Game Freak and Creatures Inc. to cut Nintendo out. Cut the cancer out. Because with all the backlash that even the court is now giving uh Nintendo, that kind of comes back on them as well. I would potentially see this as hurting their reputation as well. So the best thing they may want to do is cut Nintendo out. Much as I hate to say that. And I realize it won't be an easy decision, but I think they might honestly need to consider a different route for Pokemon as a whole. You know, we're talking about two companies here. If they're not in favor of what Nintendo is doing, then I do think they should try and get away from them. And there's another issue at hand here as well, and this is concerning pocketpair and palworld. Alright? After this whole lawsuit is all said and done, it's been commonly stated that a lot of the pals and their design can be very similar to some of the Pokemon designs. What's stopping Nintendo after they will likely lose the lawsuit to end up getting sued again, this time for an IP? Which leads me into another thing, what I think law and court systems should eventually consider. Alright? I think when it comes right down to it, if a patent that has been proven to be frivolous, or perhaps potentially, you know, used in a foul manner in the legal system, is, as I like to say, weaponized against another company, not only should the patents be thrown out, but I also think the IP, like, we know how Pokemon is like its own IP, part of Nintendo's IP. Okay? I think the IP itself should also receive a form of legal punishment. In other words, the patent that is heavily like the main focus of said game, so the ball catching mechanics, the ball throwing mechanics, yada yada, that Nintendo is trying to sue over, I think if this is proven to be frivolous, the IP itself should also maybe be affected as a little bit as well. Because what's to say that they don't try to weaponize the IP as well? And try to get their way in court over that, even if it is like something that should maybe be outlawed or even illegal, in my opinion. But case in point, I think the IP should be affected as well, not just the patents. For the specific game IP itself. So Pokemon should be adversely affected by the patent lawsuit in a bad way. Because that patent is part of the main IP in a way. Like the game mechanics that they introduced were associated with that game. So I think Pokemon as a whole should be adversely affected. Which is another reason why I think Game Freak needs to cut Nintendo out. That could be their best bet, to be honest. I realize I don't have a lot of animations here going on, but honestly, I'm not trying to do this to look pretty. I'm just trying to get my 2 cents out here. Alright? Because there's a lot going on, and this is a huge thing. Because if Palworld, well, not Palworld exclusively, but how this lawsuit plays out could affect the gaming industry for developers and gamers as a whole. So this is a huge thing, you know? And it's been the talk of all over the internet for quite a while. Like, it's got a huge portion of it. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think when it comes right down to it, you know, they need to stop. They need to seriously stop. Just give up on the lawsuit. Because honestly, they're just burning their money. And they're not going to get anything out of it. They're not gaining anything. They're just losing. This is not a battle they can win. Like, if this is a slap suit tactic, it is going to foul. It is, and it's going to fail. Like, Palworld has made pocketpair so much money, and probably will continue to make them a good amount of money for a while, that I really do think that Palworld and pocketpair will be able to afford a lawsuit of that nature and keep up with the gaming giants like Nintendo. So I don't see pocketpair losing if this is just a slapsuit tactic. But yeah, I do think the IP should also be affected. Game Freak needs to seriously consider, cutting Nintendo out. Especially if they're not in favor of Nintendo's actions. We haven't heard anything from them. Their silence is honestly what worries me. And one of the things that stopped me from purchasing Palworld sooner. See, I purchased Palworld during the 1.0, but I would have happily purchased Palworld during the beta if it weren't for the lawsuit that Nintendo, and it's honestly why I won't buy a Switch or Switch 2. Not only because it's Nintendo, but because of the fact that they're willing to brick the console, so to speak. Like, I don't approve of that. And in fact, Nintendo got a lawsuit because of that as well. So I'm really hoping this gets to the point where Nintendo starts to really get boycotted. Because this is getting out of hand. Nintendo has been very heavy-handed with their lawsuits on a lot of different things, companies, yada yada. And there's been several, like, YouTube animations, for example, that have referenced this. SMG4, shoutouts to him, by the way, his lawsuit arc went into that heavily. And I feel like Nintendo really needs to be punished for all of these lawsuits. I think law needs to get to the point where it starts punishing those who try to weaponize it against the innocent. And I feel like innocent developers are being very affected by Nintendo's weaponizing of lawsuits. I think after a certain amount, you just shouldn't be able to do a lawsuit anymore. I don't care how much money the government thinks they're making. And that's the worst part also, is the government and the law itself. Is big name companies can weaponize it against others, regardless of whether it should or should not be legal. It's a disgrace to freedom and the good nature of the people. As an American, I say that, and I feel like people across the world should also be disgusted by how easily some big name companies can weaponize the legal system against others. I feel like this is another thing that needs to be talked about, is the legal system itself. Because that in turn is also going to affect how this case with Palworld plays out. and pocketpair Nintendo and all the rest in the Pokemon company. Another thing that I potentially worry about is Game Freak, who may not realize it, if anything goes wrong, if Nintendo says certain things, or if Nintendo, for lack of a better word, fucks around and finds out, that could affect them as well because they're co-owners. So if Nintendo does the biggest fucking Hail Mary and gets shot in the foot for it, it may not just be Nintendo that takes the damages, it may also be Game Freak and Creatures Inc. They have just as much of a reason to be involved in this, and the fact that they're staying silent is a little concerning in a way. But with how this is being handled, you know, the consequences may not just affect Nintendo. It's gonna affect them as well, whether directly or indirectly. And I'm hoping that law eventually gets to the point where game developers cannot just use their big fat wallets to get their way. Unfortunately, greed is unfortunately another issue when it comes to government. They're all about the money. They don't care. That's another problem. A lot of the governments this day and age don't care. If they're getting the money, why should they do something that would directly cause them to lose money? The problem is a lot of people can't do anything about it. We're not military. We don't have 10 million guns and ammo and nuclear weapons and whatever else. We don't have the power to do what needs to be done. We're just civilians. We're not military. We're not the lawmakers. And that's kind of, in a way, a problem. When America was first made, power was supposed to be for the people. I feel like America is no longer America. Well, actually, let me reword that. The meaning of America, the purpose of freedom, has been lost. And I feel like it, the legal system itself doesn't just affect palworld, it affects the entire gaming industry as well as other related things. This is just a small example of the bigger picture. It may just be the fact that it's not just the Nintendo issue or the palworld issue or the lawsuits or stuff like that. It may be the simple fact that doing what is right is oftentimes too costly for the government. Like, money is an extreme issue, and it has been for a while now. And I definitely think that to try and get that money going, they're trying, even the government is trying to do whatever they can to get that money flowing in. It's a harsh reality of the world we live in. Money is a huge factor, and it affects everyone. I'm sorry to say it, but in this day and age, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? You can't survive off of that just alone. Not in this day and age. You cannot survive off of that. You gotta have that currency, that loot, that green dollar bill, whatever your color, your nation decides to you gotta have money. Unfortunately, that's the harsh reality of this day and age. Is money is now a decisive factor. All right? You can't just pursuit, the three things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of that can be denied over money. Doctors won't give you care if you ain't got the money. You know, you could literally be considered too broke to be worth saving. And that's a huge problem in this day and age. So the point I'm trying to make is the legal system is just as much of a factor as the lawsuit between Palworld and Nintendo. The fact that it's not that great. If we had a better legal system, I'd argue that Nintendo would already be shut down. The case is closed. It doesn't even need to go to a judge. The case could already be shut. No need to keep it open like it is. But you want to know why it's not shut? Because they're making money off of it. And that's a prime example of the corruption, and Nintendo has been using that to get their way more times than not. It's been demonstrated time and again. So, in a way, it's not just the lawsuits. It's also the greed of the government that has allowed something like this to go as far as it has. Because if you ask me, this should already be the definition of an open and shut case. As far as we know. Because Nintendo has demonstrated that they are willing to twist the law for their own personal benefit. This was demonstrated with when they tried to change their patents mid-lawsuit. If they think they can get away with it, they're going to try it. And they're even trying things that, honestly, it should be just easy to throw it out. Honestly, I think the lawsuit should be shut down. Because at this point, it's arguably frivolous. In fact, I do think the lawsuit has become frivolous and serves no purpose any longer, and the case just needs to be shut in favor of pocketpair. But who knows? Maybe Game Freak has some kind of secret weapon, and that's why this is still going. Because let's be real here, they're the ones who made these mechanics. And honestly, I don't know why this is still going. I don't know why this isn't just an open and shut deal. I don't know if you can hear me clapping, but that's just what I think should happen. Lawmakers need to get to the point where they start nipping these kind of cases in the bud. Quite literally. They need to stop allowing things like this to go on. Because honestly, it's kind of disgusting. But yeah, it's just when you really think outside of the box, you know, the smallest of things overall eventually lead into everything that has been happening. You know, you have to look at just not just the big things, but also the small. Because every little thing can add up. Hey, Mario Slash. Welcome on in. I'm just adding my 2 cents to the Palworld lawsuit deal that's been going on. But yeah, I strongly believe that at the end of this, it's a large amount of mess and drama that nobody should ever have to deal with. And yet, unfortunately, because of Nintendo's greed and other related things, they were able to get away with this as long as they have. I do feel like this case shouldn't be going on as long as it has. Super Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe. I have that. Right there. I think that's the DX version now. But I think I do have Deluxe somewhere on here. Anyway. Case in point. The legal system itself needs refining. That much is a given. Way more than what it is. To start throwing out these types of cases that are just frivolous, weaponized, because When it comes right down to it, it's clear that the government is just trying to make the money. And while I can't blame them, I feel like they should try to be doing other methods. And it would probably benefit the people of the world in the long run. But yeah, it's just a large number of things that have all led up into this big hoo-ha-ha. Because when you're going through this sort of thing, you have to look at the tiniest of details. Because once you overlook even one small thing, your entire case can just get shot out from under you. And when you look like you're winning, you're suddenly on the back foot, or maybe even facing down damages or guilty verdicts that you may or may not deserve. So, the truth of the matter is, it's not just the lawsuit itself that we have to worry about, it's also the legal system. Because, well, it's far from perfect. And nothing ever will truly be perfect. But I do think our government could be doing a hell of a lot better when it comes to the legal system. I think when we get to the point where money is no longer an issue, the government will start serving the people a little better. And we can start getting like cases like this just thrown out and, you know, thrown out before they can even have a chance to begin. You know, like pocketpair shouldn't even have to get involved. They can just know for a fact that they're doing the right thing and they're doing what they enjoy, which is providing gamers with. And that's the best part is palworld wasn't in it for them. Like they did a huge W. They didn't raise the price of palworld when 1.0 was released. Honestly, I think they made more money because of that. Because they earned the favor of the people. They didn't raise the price, even though everyone expected them to. But they didn't. And I'd argue that just made them a lot more money. Because every one of those $20 just adds up over time when you have millions of people. A million times 20 is 20 million. I'd say that's a pretty good payday. So yeah, they're making bank off of this. And they don't even have a high price for it. Imagine if, like, I dare say this game could have sold for $40, and they would have made just as much money. Okay? In fact, I'm gonna be real with y'all. Opportunity presents itself, I donate to pocketpair. I'm not rich Uncle Pennybags, so unfortunately I can't really donate to anyone. But let me tell you, if I did have the money to fling around, I'd be throwing it at my favorite devs, and palworld would be one of those devs I'd support. Pocketpair, I should say. But yeah, for that game, palworld, that on its own. Shut up and take my money, quite literally. Anyway, I believe I've said what I need to say. This is kind of a rant sort of deal, but honestly, I just wanted to get my opinion out there. I think palworld has done extremely well. Pocketpair should, by definition, win this lawsuit, period. While there are still some concerns, like I feel like Nintendo is going to end up really, like, I'm sorry to say it, but if Nintendo somehow does magically find a way to win this lawsuit, they're going to piss off so many people. Like, they're going to earn the ire of a lot of people. And not only that, but there's a problem with this day and age, all right? The harsh reality of this world is there are people who are willing to go to extreme measures, all right? That's just the harsh reality. There are a lot of people. And the harsh reality is there are criminals out there and even terrorists who will go to extreme measures. And if you piss off the wrong person, sometimes that can be all it takes. And then you end up in a situation worse than just losing a lawsuit. That's the harsh reality of this day and age. And as a matter of fact, even now, pocketpair, according to some comments I saw, was receiving death threats and stuff like that. Whether it was from Nintendo or not, I mean, probably not, but I don't think Nintendo would be dumb enough to do that. But I mean, there is the, you know, common thing, Nintendo assassins. They're ninjas. I don't think they'll go that far, but when it comes right down to it, the problem is you have to be careful in this world. It ain't kind. That's the harsh reality. And it only takes one. It only takes one oops. You piss off the wrong person who has the power to do whatever the hell they so please. And palworld and pocketpair has to worry about that as well. Let's assume that what I say does actually come to pass and Nintendo decides to do the ultimate fucking big dump. And I'm sorry, but with the way they've been handling this lawsuit, them doing a big dumb that kills their entire company, I'd say it, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility. They may have their white knights and all that, but they're really stepping on some toes. Big name companies always have to try and secure themselves from their haters. Because there's a lot of people, criminals and the like, who would be more than happy to tear up any big name company, even if it's just for the sake of a reputation. Just for that moment of glory. Some people literally willing to die for that. Why do you think there's stuntmen? This day and age. And it's like I said, it's things like this you have to think about. So that's my thought process. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it here. I think I've said all that I need to say. But yeah, there's just so much to consider over this lawsuit. And so many things that gaming companies and devs have to worry about and consider. And while this is unrelated, I'm gonna throw one last side note in here. One of the even small companies, so just fan games, are not safe. A prime example is Sonic.exe, the Forgotten Memories. What? Wait, Forgotten? Was it Forbidden Memories? Let me real fast. Or no, it wasn't called Forgotten Memories. I think it was Outcome Memories. I kept calling it Forgotten. Jeez. Anyway, the developers of Outcome Memories actually had another issue as well. One of the developers actually had his family brought into danger. And it's just another prime example of what developers have to potentially deal with if they piss off their fan base. There are some people willing to go to those kind of extreme measures. And all it takes is one mistake and severe things could happen. Obviously, though, there'll still be those good people who don't go to those extreme measures, people who value their lives, but anyone who's basically prepared to become a criminal could potentially, for the sake of fame or whatever else, one man could just suddenly start something that nobody wants to be involved in. That's the harsh reality of the world we live in. And everyone has to do everything in their power to protect themselves from that sort of thing. Anyway, GamerX459, peace out.